I'd like to begin with a story that Paramahansa Yogananda used to share. And when he was a young man, in 1920, he shifted to America. If you've read the autobiography of a yogi, which, by the way, I'd like to see, a show of hands, who has read the autobiography of a yogi? Okay, well, it's quite a few. And perhaps some of you have come today with questions. What is this Kriya Yoga that we're talking about? What is this Kriya Yoga that Paramahansa Yogananda shared in that autobiography? And if you've come perhaps for our class today to learn some of these techniques, whether or not you're interested in Kriya Yoga, you're going to find that these techniques we share today of meditation, energy, these things have the potential to change your life. And so I very much recommend you to stay behind to learn these techniques. But there's one caveat, one condition, you might say. They will change your life if you practice. That's the deal we have to make, is if you practice, you'll see tremendous change. And if you're interested, I can encourage you to then continue to come back and go deeper into this science of Kriya Yoga. But as I said, Paramahansa Yogananda, he went to America in 1920, and the first years of his life there, he traveled intensively, spreading these teachings. And he would tell a story, simple story, and it was about frogs that lived next to a very large lake. And it seems that there were a group of frogs there was one frog in particular, he lived next to a very large lake. And he would swim in the lake, but at nighttime, he would hear the croaking of many other frogs coming from a little distance in the forest. And finally, one day, he was very curious, who were making these noises? And so he hopped, found where it was coming from, and there was a well. Deep in the ground, there was a well there. And he looked in, and all around the bottom, it was filled with frogs croaking in the well. So, seeing them, he hopped in, landed in the midst of the frogs, and they were very surprised to see this other frog, coming from somewhere, from the sky perhaps, landing in the midst of them. And he introduced himself, and they wondered, where have you come from? And he says, I've come from a very beautiful place. There's a great lake, there's a large body of water, just a short distance away from this well. Come, if you come with me, we can go out and I'll show you. And they said, no, we're very happy here. And he began to try to convince them. And well, there was one large frog there, he was the king. And he said, don't listen to him, to his other fellow frogs. Don't listen to him. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And he began to ask questions of the frog who had come in. And he says, tell me about this place. And he says, it's beautiful. As beautiful as this? Much more beautiful than that. Well, how big is it? It's much, much bigger than that. As big as this? He says, tremendously much more beautiful, much bigger. And so the big frog puffed himself up, and he hopped all the way across the well on the bottom. He says, is it that big? And the little frog said, much, much bigger. And he began to convince the king frog too. And he says, I guarantee this is going to be much more beautiful than here. You'll like it. And finally, many of the frogs agreed to go with him. So they hopped and hopped, and they hopped themselves out of the well, and they began to follow the frog. And it's true. They came finally to this beautiful lake, big pond perhaps, even bigger. And they went to live in that lake, and they found it was true. It was beautiful. It was expansive. They were happy, and they left that little well behind. Now, Yogananda used to stop the story at about that point. But I always, in my mind, thought, I bet there were some frogs who didn't follow him. They stayed in the well, And I can just imagine what they were saying. I'm not going to go out there. I'm happy here. I like my little well. Why should I go out there? Why should I explore something bigger? It's perfectly fine. Stay here in this well. Now, Yogananda didn't say that, but I was guessing that might be the case. But what he was saying, of course, is what all of us are faced with. The great masters come, the great saints come again and again and again to bring us this message that there's a beautiful world out there that we can hardly imagine, hardly dream of. And if we just take the courage to explore, to jump out of this little well, we could find it, we'd be happy. And he gave this message over and over again in one form or another, one story or another, because he had gone to America with a special purpose. It wasn't haphazard that he went to America. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was something that was divinely ordained. The great masters of our line of gurus had predicted that the world had entered into a new age at about that time, 150 years ago, and that the world was changing. You could see it. You looked at the world of the early 19th century had drastically changed. It had entered into a world of energy, a time of energy. And the masters had predicted that this was the time when new teachings, that's the wrong word, not new teachings, old teachings reawakened. It was predicted this was the time for them to be introduced into the world. And it was the mission of those teachers to bring that back into the world at this time and in this age. And so Yogananda was sent by his gurus to go to the West, to share those teachings, to awaken people to an art that had been lost in ages past. Now, his mission was not just to go to America. His mission was for the world. His mission was to reach all people. His guru, Sri Yukteswar, had trained him. Sri Yukteswar's Param Guru, Mahavatar Babaji, had initiated his disciple Lahiri Mahashaya high in the Himalayas in 1861. And he gave him this teaching of Kriya Yoga. Said it is being reawakened in this age because it had been lost because of priestly secrecy and mankind's indifference. And he predicted, he said, and then ultimately to Sri Yukteswar, I will send you a student to be trained to take these teachings out into the world. And that student was Paramahansa Yogananda. And Yogananda fulfilled that mission. Now, when he initiated Lahiri Mahashaya in 1861, he says, the teachings that I give to you today are the same teachings that were taught to Krishna, to Patanjali, to the great saints, the great sages of ancient times, and even in a slightly similar technique was given to Christ and his disciples as well, because these are ancient teachings that are universal. And if we read in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, I gave these teachings to Vishvavat, who gave it to Manu, who passed it on to Ishvaku, who passed it on to the saints and ancient saints and sages of ancient times, the rishis of ancient times. This same teaching has been passed down from generation to generation to generation. But unfortunately, it was somewhat hidden and lost for thousands of years As we know from tradition, it's said that Krishna, at the time of Krishna, time of the war, Kurukshetra, the world entered into a dark age. But Babaji said, and Sri Yukteswar, Lahiri Mahashai said, in this age, at this time, the world is coming out of that dark age into this world, this time, this era, this age of energy. And it's now time to reawaken this ancient teaching once again. And so Yogananda was chosen to take these teachings out, to propagate these teachings out into the world at large. And that's the tradition that Ananda Sangha shares and continues to teach and share with other people. Now, people ask, of course, and you're maybe asking in your own mind, what is this teaching of Kriya? Swami Kriyananda once asked Yogananda, he says, "Sir, is this a new religion?" And Yogananda said, "No, of course not. It's not a new religion. It's a new expression. In the deepest sense, there is no new religion. There's only one religion. It's that pathway that all of us follow." Now, you might think, well, of course, there's many different religions in this world, but I'm saying deep within each of us, as humanity, as souls, as individuals, all of us are built in exactly the same way. We have a body, we have an interior nervous system. We're the same. We're all one people, world over. And all of us are seeking, although we may not know it, all of us are seeking exactly the same thing. We're seeking to reunite ourselves with God, or perhaps you might want to say we're seeking freedom, soul freedom, or maybe take it down a little bit lower below that. Maybe that's a little too exalted. We're all seeking happiness, everybody. Or the alternative, we're trying to avoid suffering. Buddha expressed it that way. But we're all seeking the same thing. Now, it's common, people say, well, we're all seeking the same things, but there are many paths to that. But in reality, if we go beneath the surface of true religions, we see that they're all following the same inner path, because awakening takes place within each person in a certain way, in a defined way. We awaken to that higher consciousness. We awaken to freedom exactly the same. Just a little bit externally, we're different, cultural differences. But because we are built the same way, we awaken to the light and the potential in the same way. And this is the teaching, that way of awakening that Krishna taught, because it's one. It's original. Now, original, that comes from the word origin, because they all have the same origin, which is we attain freedom because we're built a certain way. And as Yogananda took it a little bit even further, he said we all find freedom in the same way through our very own nervous system. We have to learn to withdraw that life force that goes out into the world seeking happiness. People think, well, I want happiness, of course. How do I find it? Well, a new car, new house, family, a career, ice cream, whatever it might be. Where if I go out there and I find it out there, but unfortunately, you finish the ice cream. And then what? You get the new house, and then you have to maintain it. You get the car, and your son or daughter puts a dent in it. Then what do? Now your happiness is gone. You have to do it again. It doesn't last, and I think you all know that. Happiness of that sort doesn't last, and we have to look again and again and again. But unfortunately, we never quite come to the end of it. And so this is raises the question, of course, well, how can I find that happiness which all of us are seeking? And we come to realize, if we're wise, that the happiness is not out there. No matter how many new cars I get, I'm never going to be happy for long. Now, I will be happy for a little while. They call it the new car smell. You know it? But then it goes away, and it's the same old thing again. Lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. Until finally we begin to ask ourselves, there's got to be something more. And that something more, where is it? It's inside of ourselves. Now, this has been explained by philosophers for centuries. Happiness is within you. God is within you. The divine is within you. But what is missing with just to say that? The question, deeper question is, yes, if happiness is within you, how do I find it? Where in me is that happiness? And that's what the great ones come down to explain again and again. And that principle of how to answer that question, how do I find that happiness is within myself, is the eternal question that great saints, speaking of Chaitanya, Jesus Christ, Adi Shankara, Krishna teaching the Arjuna, all the way back to his forefathers, they've all been asking that same question. It's an eternal question. And the answer to that question is the same. Now, it takes different expressions, but the basic answer is the same, that happiness is within ourselves, and what we need to do is to be able to find that method by which we can guarantee that happiness that doesn't end. It's not temporary. And that's the art of Kriya. Now, there are many techniques. I'm sure many of you have been exposed to many techniques. You can do this, promising you happiness, promising this. But where Kriya is specifically effective is it's the direct route. Yogananda used to use the airplane route to God. Now, I don't know if they would use airplane, the rocket route now maybe they would say, but he was saying it's the direct route to being able to achieve that which we really want, as opposed to those things that are indirect. For example, traditional religion, and I'm not criticizing indirect routes because they're good, but I can do something that stimulates a positive feeling within myself. For example, here every Thursday night, and also tonight on Sunday night, we have a satsang, and we always do arati at the conclusion, which is the symbolic offering of light, the symbolic offering of ourselves, of who we are. We offer it to God and gurus. We wave the light, and we symbolically offer that. And in that symbolic gesture, we feel uplifted. We feel a connection by doing that. And many, many people do this. You'd perhaps do this. It's traditional. Now that's indirect, because the light itself didn't uplift that and give us that godly feeling inside, but it stimulated it. Now, what Kriya is, the science of Kriya, is built upon the premise, if we could introspect, look within ourselves, and discover what is happening within us when we're feeling a divine inspiration. What is happening within us when we're feeling happiness? What is happening within us when perhaps we see light at the point between here up in the forehead? Sometimes people see this, or you have a divine vision. What is happening? And what can we do to directly affect that direction of our inspiration? Well, one thing you will notice very simply, when you're happy, in which direction when you're joyful, in which direction do you look? Do you look down? Do you look up? When you're happy, when you're feeling positive about something, do you look down or do you look up? If you're going up, of course you're looking up. When you feel, and matter of fact, certainly in English at least, if you feel happy, you might say, I feel very up today. I am uplifted. Isn't that so? The language itself expresses a direction. Whereas if you feel badly, what might you say? I feel down today. So there's a sense of up and down that is even reflected in our language. It's reflected in our body posture. And inwardly, you'll find that it's reflected in the movement of very subtle forces that are moving within you in your body. Now, what I'm saying here is that spiritual awakening, which is deeper than merely being happy, you could say, but happiness is a good start. Something is happening within ourselves. There's a movement of life force within ourselves. It's a movement of life force up. And the opposite, when there's a movement of life force, a general movement of life force down, there's a sense of discouragement or a sense of depression. Now, if we could learn to be aware of those forces within ourselves, we could learn to perhaps control those, to stimulate those. And this is exactly what is happening. And this is exactly also what Krishna refers to in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, of course, as I've said already, that this is an ancient teaching. These things have been, this principle that I am sharing with you today, Arjuna, are principles that have been handed down from ancient times through that lineage. These same principles I am handing to you. And there's one very pertinent phrase or sloka. He says, the yogi, he says, be thou a yogi, Arjuna. The yogi pours the pran into the apan and the apan into the pran. Now, most people who read the Gita, they skip that one pretty quickly because it doesn't, what does that mean? They go right by it. But what Krishna is saying there, he's saying something very significant. The pran and the apan, of course, are currents that are life force currents that travel up and down in the spine. And what he's saying is learn to pour one into the other. In other words, to neutralize them. Neutralize those flows deep in the spine. And you'll find that you begin to neutralize the waves of ups and downs and bring them into a focus. Now, that's not enough just to do that. You then bring them to a focus and you uplift them upward to the brain, to the point between the eyebrows specifically. And this is the process of yoga. But yoga, you could say this a little bit more in modern terms. Also referred to in the Gita, remember the other sloka where he says the yogi is like the tortoise who withdraws its limbs into its shell. Well, what we're doing, and this is we pursue our happiness out in the world. The car, the ice cream, whatever it might be, the happy family. These are good things. They're good things. They're not bad. They're not bad, but they're not going to give you the permanent happiness. They're not happiness you seek. They're not going to give you moksha, finding in that direction. What we need to do is to live in this world, enjoying as we choose, but not to be of this world, bound and attached to it, to be able to be like that tortoise, to be able to withdraw that life force that attention that goes out to think our happiness is out there, to withdraw it back into ourselves, neutralize those, and then to direct it upward to the brain. And this is the basics of what yoga is about. This is the basic principle that has been handed down from ancient times. Withdraw that life force into the center of ourselves. Neutralize that. Uplift that up to the brain, up to the point between the eyebrows, the upper chakras, however you choose. And there you'll find your freedom. And as it says in the Bible, if thine eye be single, thy whole body will be full of light. That neutralize, bring them to a point of singularity, and your whole body will be full of light. And this eye here at the spiritual eye is what is being referred to. So this is the universal direction. Now, I mentioned a little bit earlier that in the time of Kurukshetra, it said, tradition says that the world entered into a dark age at that point, Kali, at that point. And as the masters have explained, this deeper understanding of these principles became lost or dissipated. And Kali Yuga, one of the characteristics of Kali is it's an age of matter, of physicality, and it hypnotizes us into thinking that this physical world is the ultimate reality, that this is very solid. And of course it's solid. But what do physicists say now? Is this really solid? It's actually mostly space. There's only a little fraction that is actually solid about it. But we have taken it to say, yes, this world is very solid. And this is the ultimate reality. But the ancients and the yogis, it says, no, that's not so. There is a deeper reality behind this physical universe. And science is now saying the same thing. What does science say that matter actually also is? What did Einstein say? E equals mc squared. Energy. It's actually energy. That's its more basic form. And now that's come to be accepted as the reality of behind this seemingly solid world. But most people don't experience in that way. In time future, I think scientists will come to the point to say this world is not only energy, it's consciousness. That's what the basic reality of this world is. It's consciousness. And we'll come to that understanding. Well, if the world went into a dark age, as tradition says, at that age, the masters have said it's not as long as common folklore says, hundreds of thousands of years, age of Kali. It's actually, we have begun to exit from that time, and that we're now moving into a higher age again, and that we have moved into a higher age of energy. But in the age of darkness, when we think in terms of physical matter, even yoga itself, the deeper understanding of what yoga is was lost. And we began to associate yoga as physical exercise. Now, that's okay. It's okay, but it's not that alone. We began to think of yoga as breath exercise, perhaps. That's another aspect of it, pranayama. Now, that's good too, but it's not that alone. The higher understanding of what it is that this breath is actually representative. This pran is representative of life force itself. And Kriya Yoga is the science of helping us become aware that behind matter there is life force. And that life force is moving within the body in specific ways. And if we can learn to control that life force, we can neutralize that pran and apan draw that life force into the spine and uplift that life force up to the point between the eyebrows. And in the process, we begin to burn up quickly those seeds of karma that are said to be deposited in the subtle part of our body. Very quickly we can attain that freedom that all of us are seeking. Now, how do we do that? And for those of you who are taking the workshop today, you're going to learn the first beginning techniques of how to accomplish that. And that's, you might say, the foundation of this teaching. But as you progress further, if you're interested, you're going to learn deeper techniques that help us become aware of that life force. And what Kriya is meant to do is to help us be able to create a magnet in our spine. Our spine is said to contain currents of life force moving up and down in association with the breath. As you inhale, there's a current that goes up. As you exhale, the current that goes down. Some of you have heard of these currents, Irda, Pingala, Pran, Apon. If you concentrate upon these, you can learn to create a magnet in the spine. You can become magnetic. Now, it's helpful to be magnetic. Your daily life will improve if you're very magnetic. Have you ever noticed some people in life, you'd say, that's a magnetic person. They have magnetism. Or, and that successful person who, you name a rich one. They have a certain type of magnetism, at least. They attract wealth, perhaps. Other people, sportsmen, personality, actors. Some of them, two people. One's a great actor, the other one's not. You look at them, they're both very handsome fellows. Why is one seemingly has a light inside of them that's magnetic? That's what we all want. We want to be magnetic and attract to us prosperity, attract to us success. Success comes from magnetism. And so we create a magnet within ourselves by revolving this life force in the spine and making ourselves more inwardly dynamic. And this is essentially based upon the same principle that physics works on. If you revolve electricity around a bar, you're going to, of steel or metal, iron, you're going to be able to create a magnet in that piece of metal. It's the same principle. We're going to learn to do that. And that magnetism begins to withdraw all of those life force desires, that same life force going out, prana going out into the senses. You're going to be able to bring it inside, into a focus. That light which is scattered, you make it into a focused light, and it has power. And it's the same thing with us. We learn to focus our life force. And then, that's not enough. We then learn to direct that life force toward some end. And in a spiritual sense, we direct that life force up the spine. And we have that sense of upliftment, that sense of success, that sense of I am energetic, I'm magnetic, I'm positive. And you begin to stimulate this, and your life begins to change. I'd like to just sort of make this a little bit more practical in some senses for you. There's a story that Yogananda also used to use as an illustration. And it's a story from the Bible. And in the Bible, there is a farmer, and he's sowing his crops. And he's sowing, let's say, their wheat or whatever it might be. He's sowing his crops. And at night, his neighbor, who is his enemy, comes into his field, and he sows seeds of wheat or weeds. He's something that you don't want in the field, and he sows it full of weeds. But the farmer doesn't know. And a little time goes by, and pretty soon it comes up. And the laborers come and tell the farmer, "Sir, your field is full of weeds in amongst the wheat. Should we uproot them? Should we get rid of them? Should we pull them out?" And the farmer says, "No, let them grow. And when the weeds and the wheat have reached maturity, we will harvest the wheat, separate it from the weeds, and we'll burn the weeds then." And the Bible just basically tells that story and then goes on. It doesn't explain it. What's that? What was that all about? Why did he tell that story? And of course, Christ wouldn't explain these things. He says, "Those who have ears to hear, let them hear." But he didn't bother to explain a lot of these things. And so somebody asked Yogananda that. "Well, what does that mean?" And he says, what it is, he says, we are that farmer. We plant seeds of good habits in our life. But when we go to sleep at night, our subconscious tendencies and habits from the past, they spring forth and they infest our field. And they too grow. And so they grow up, and pretty soon you notice, your discrimination notices, I've got these good habits, I've got these bad habits. Should I pull them up? Should I go out there and pull up the weeds? And the Guru says, no, don't pull them up now, because if you try to uproot those bad habits now, you're going to pull the good ones out too. Let them grow. And when they grow up, then your good habits will you'll feel joy, you'll feel ecstasy, your good habits will have matured, and then you'll be able to discriminate and pull out the bad habits at that time and burn them at that time. Now, that's the story from the Bible, and Yogananda used to interpret that. But the illustration of that was there was a man who came to him who was in Los Angeles, man became his disciple, but before he became the disciple, he wanted to speak with Yogananda, and he was a worldly man, let's say that. He was worldly. He was actually a singer and a movie actor. And he came to Yogananda, and Yogananda says, well, how may I help you? And the man says, all my life, I've heard people telling me what I shouldn't do. And, he had bad habits. People were always lecturing me about what I should not do. I want to know what I should do. And Yogananda just said, well, do you smoke? And the man said, oh, yes, I do. And Yogananda says, you can do that. So the man thought, well, then Yogananda asked him, do you drink liquor, alcohol? And the fellow says, well, yes, I do. And Yogananda says, you can do that. Now the man was wondering, what is this fellow? What kind of spiritual teacher is this? And then Yogananda hits him with the big one. He says, well, do you enjoy sex and running after that sort of thing? And the actor says, well, as a matter of fact, I do. And Yogananda says, you can do that. Now the man was totally confused. But then Yogananda paused for an instant. And he says, but if you practice the teachings, that which I am can teach you, I cannot guarantee that you won't want to leave all of those things behind and not want to do any of those things anymore. And the man was so struck by that because that was a positive way of approaching, that he took up what Yogananda was advising him, and he did. He left all that other stuff behind because he found that what he was experiencing was worth it. It no longer made him attracted to something else. And this is something that you're going to find in your life. you're attracted to certain ways of behaving. Now, I'm sure none of you smoke or any of that, maybe, but you're not going to be attracted to those. When you're at a certain level of understanding, you're at a certain level of fulfillment in your life. When you're under a certain level of living a certain way, these things seem very attractive to you. And you fall into those habits, you fall into those directions. But you find that you change that consciousness. You change your magnetism. You can almost say that your magnetism is drawing certain tendencies to you. And you find yourself falling into this habit, that habit again and again. Now, you try to cut out those weeds. They're like the weeds. Pull out those weeds. That's, of course, one way to do it. But usually you're cutting the weeds at the ground level, and then their roots are still there. They're coming back again, sometimes double. But you find that if you change your magnetism, change your level of understanding, change your consciousness to a higher level, you suddenly begin to attract other things into your life. Your life changes. And so you don't have to so much attack those weeds. If you're a gardener, you plant something good to drown them out, to take over the garden so that the weeds no longer receive sunlight. And you find that in that way, your life begins to change. And this is the secret. So many people try to change their life simply by trying to beat on the negative side of themselves. Beat it out with a stick. But you can't drive out the darkness with a stick. The answer is you turn on the light. That's how you get rid of darkness. And that's, for us, if we want to make changes in our life, we have to do that which is going to change the darkness into light. And that happens by learning to, yes, don't tempt yourself with negative temptations, obviously. You say, choose your environment well. You see, no use putting yourself in an environment where you're having to fight all the time. But choose your environment well, and you'll find that you'll begin to attract those things that are in harmony with the consciousness that you're developing within yourself. And this is the secret to being successful. And this, in almost any way, actually in any direction in your life, but particularly for those of us who want to change their life to something better. And this is what Kriya Yoga is about, is learning to solve our problems, not by attacking the problem, but by raising our awareness so that we begin to attract solutions. And there's a phrase that is often used, be solution conscious, not problem consciousness. Now, it does not mean that you ignore the problem, but because you have to be aware, okay, there is a problem, but what is the solution to that problem? And you'll find you change your consciousness, you uplift yourself. When you're in a joyful state, or a happy state, or a calm state, let's use calmness. If you're in an office and it's very tumultuous, tension-producing, is it going to help you if let's say your office mate is a little bit irritating? Is it going to help you to yell at that person? Or is it going to help you to become calm inside yourself and perhaps influence that person to also become calm? You have the choice. How do you respond to what happens in your life is going to change what happens in the future. If you've read the autobiography of a yogi, there's a beautiful phrase in there that I refer to again and again. He says the past lives, and this is Yogananda's guru saying this, he says the past lives of all men are dark with many shames. And then he goes on, everything in future will improve if you make the right spiritual effort now. Everything in future will improve if you make the right spiritual effort now. So if you want to change the future, some people say, oh, my karma, I can't do anything about it. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can do a lot. You can change that karma, because if you continue to do something in a certain pattern, you're setting the stage for something to happen one way. But if you improve, you are, by what you do today, setting the pattern for what is going to happen tomorrow. And so everything in future will improve if you make the right spiritual effort now. And this is what the great masters, all of them, whatever their outward clothing, they all come to deliver this message that today's actions will improve your life for the future. And they all bring this message that our goal in life is to uplift our consciousness. Our goal in life, you could say this in a more broad sense, is to be in the light rather than in the darkness. Our goal in life and our destiny in life, if we so choose it, is to be happy rather than suffering. Get away, Krishna says, from this ocean of delusion. That's our commandment, to get away from it. But it doesn't mean running up to the hills. It means in our daily life of what we do right now, let's live in the light, not in darkness. And this is how we change ourselves. And if we do that, we find that our daily life practically changes. Now, Yogananda, he went to the West, but he had to go somewhere to start. And there was lots of historical reasons why he went to the West. But his message was meant for the whole world. He actually predicted, he said, to his father, he said this, Father, this message of Lahiri Mahashaya will spread to every country in the world. You wait and see. I don't know if he said those words exactly, but he said, I predict. And so it has come to pass. So it was his mission to take this teaching of Kriya that had been revived by Lahiri Mahashaya, by his initiation from Babaji. Lahiri Mahashaya revived it, you might say, in the world at that time. Yogananda took it out into the world. And now it's in all countries, in all lands. And it's available for those students, those truth seekers who are willing to take action. Kriya, of course, comes from the root word for action. That action will free us. That frees us, for there's no more, to the point where there's no more action needed. That action which frees us is at the root of what Kriya means. So for us, what is that action needed? It's to get started. It's to do something in a positive direction. People ask the question, I ask it, you ask it, I'm sure, what should I do in life? What's the right action? What's the proper thing to do? Whatever the circumstance, it's that action which will take you toward the light. That action which will take you toward freedom. That action which will take you away from attachment to this physical world toward freedom. That action which will help you overcome your bondage to ego. It's the same. It doesn't matter which culture, which outward clothing of religion we wear. It's the same message, East and West. Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, these are clothing only. That essential message is what Krishna brought 2,000 plus, 2,500, how many years ago. It's the same thing. And he brought this message and elucidated this through the Gita. And again, as Babaji said, in this age, I'm giving you that same teaching, that Krishna gave and that many great masters of many traditions have practiced and given to their disciples. And so I encourage you to take up and take action. Take action. Do something. And do something in a positive direction that'll take you toward what your heart and what your soul truly longs for. Soul freedom, freedom in God, light over darkness. And I think this is ending with this thought. This is very important today. The world needs to move in a positive direction. India, of course, needs to move in a positive direction, but this isn't one country's mission. This is everybody's mission, to move in a positive direction, because these forces of materialism, this is very solid. My happiness lies in things. All of these forces, and ultimately those impulses ultimately lead to conflict. This is important today, that a group of us, some hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands, whatever it might be, take seriously this responsibility to become instruments of positive light in the world today. And whether it's this path, other path, whatever your chosen direction is, be a force for positive change in the world today, because the world very much needs it. And I think in the doing of that, we ourselves become changed, because the instrument is blessed by what passes through it. So your blessing will be great if you allow light, peace, calmness, joy, these qualities, let them pass through you. And if you wish, learn the techniques that allow you to be able to attune yourself and find those in your daily life, and then take it out and share it with other people. Because that's how ultimately, from a little one candle passed to its neighbors, to its neighbors, to neighbors, ultimately that light is spread throughout this country and other countries, and the world itself becomes a better place. So with that, I'm going to turn it over